Okay, so today we are looking at the concept of emergency fund. Emergency fund. Okay, so I first heard about emergency fund after I think I listened to one of Dave Ramsey's presentations, and what he said was we each need to have an emergency fund, and his suggested amount was 1,000 US dollars, and with anticipation or with the expectation that 1,000 is able to cover for you for at least a month in case of an emergency. And then what he said was once you have this amount, and then you go around and if you have debts, ensure that you pay all your debts. Once your debts are cleared, you go back to this emergency fund so that you can at least have money that can cover for you for 3 to 6 months in case something happens. Yeah, but for the sake of this presentation today, we're just going to look at the first emergency fund that you need to raise, which is a 1 month emergency fund. So first thing first, what is an emergency fund? Okay, what is an emergency fund? This is really simply, it's money that is set aside for anticipated expenses, which may or may not happen, right? As the money that is set aside for anticipated expenses, which may or may not happen. Now, there's a difference between the emergency fund, and your monthly expenses. So as mentioned, the expenses here may or may not happen, right? And the expenses here, they are there. The expenses here, they are there. There's no other way. You need to pay for them. For instance, your monthly expenses might include, I think this one is an obvious one. It includes food. You have your utilities, and you can have your rent if you are renting. So these expenses under monthly expenses, they are there and you need to pay for them. Now the difference with the emergency fund is under the emergency fund, the expenses, you can have something like I'm trying to position it so that it doesn't look skewed. So you can have something like say car repair. You don't anticipate but you don't put car repair under your monthly expenses each and every month. But you can anticipate that probably the car might need or probably something can happen with the car. So you can have that expense under emergency fund. And then you can also have under emergency, you can have, say for example, medical bill. I know if you have a medical aid, there are those ailments that are covered under medical aid, but it can happen that you have expenses that are not covered by the medical aid. So when that happens, you want to have money under your emergency fund that covers for this. Yeah, so that is the major difference between the emergency fund and your monthly expenses. Monthly expenses, know that you're going to use the money for whatever expenses that you have catered for. But for the emergency, you may or may not use the money. So what does the emergency fund covers? Okay. So your emergency fund, in a case where you lose your job, you want your emergency fund to cater for you. I don't know whether you have been in a situation where probably there's an emergency where you come from, like here in Botswana, we have villages, So when there are emergencies, like in the village, and you don't have money to even go there, you don't have transport money, you don't have money to send, those are some of the moments that we really need to think hard and dive into having an emergency fund, because it's that critical. Because when you have an emergency fund, when emergencies arises, you just tap into it and use the money for that. And the key with emergency fund is once you use the money, you need to replenish it. So under the categories, this I'll leave to your discernment, to your discernment, but I'll just give examples of categories that you can put under the emergency fund, because we differ. People differ. My expenses might not be your expenses. So, but obviously, one, you need to have money, enough money that can cover for your monthly expense. Yeah, because it's with your monthly expense where you tend to pay for things like the rent, the food, utilities, transport. If you have kids, baby care. So under category 1, under the emergency fund, you need to have the money that is enough to cater for all of this. And then number 2, you need to have money that you can use, in case your car needs to be repaired, you need to have money for that. And the third category, medic, as mentioned, some medical ailments are not covered under the medical aid, so you want to have this category under emergency. Number 4 can just have a miscellaneous, just money that can buffer in case you miss a category. And one thing I know that that's if you are in Botswana, we are big when it comes to funeral covers. But in an instance where you don't do funeral covers, you also want to have a category that you set money aside that can be able to help you in case you have to cover a funeral for a relative or for a relative. So but for the sake of this demonstration, I'll just have 4 categories. You need to have enough money to cover for your expenses, your monthly expenses, your transport, your rent, your food, utilities, baby care. And you need to have a category for the car, category for the medic, and category for miscellaneous. And once again, you know your situation and you know what you need to set money for. Yeah. Now, how much should we set aside for the emergency fund? First thing first, we said that your emergency fund should be able to cater for your monthly expenses. So to break this monthly expenses down, say we have rent, we put it at 2.5. We have food, 1.3. We have transport, 500. We have baby care, That's if you have kids. You might think, oh, also tuition, you know, anything is possible. So if you have kids that are that are in private schools, you want to have tuition here under your emergency fund, yeah. And then you have your utilities, which we'll put at 500. We have yeah, so this will be the monthly expenses, yeah, this will be the monthly expenses. And the second category is we have car repair, and we estimate 800. And then we have medic, we estimate 500. And then we have miscellaneous, which we estimate 500. Now when you do the total of this expenses, it amounts to 8,600. Now it's a huge amount, yes, it's a huge amount, but there's just that peace of mind that you have once you know that if anything happens, there's money that you can tap into to assist, yeah. So from my calculations, I need to set aside 8,600. So if I was to save this on a monthly basis, I mean, if I'm to raise my emergency fund in a year, I'll need to have at least be depositing 720 on a monthly basis, so that I can achieve this by December. But what is advisable is you need to try as much as you can to reach this target faster, yeah. And there are different ways that you can utilize in order to reach this amount faster. If you have watched my video on budget, if you have not, please do watch it. But essentially what I'm saying in the video is, when you're budgeting, you have what is called your fixed expenses, you have what is called your variable expenses, and you have your savings. Now when you're raising this amount, because it's an emergency fund, ideally you don't have to disturb your savings. You don't have to disturb your savings, yeah. So if it's anything, if you want to raise it as soon as possible, look at your variable expenses, because your variable expenses include things like eating out, your restaurant, it includes the hair, the clothes, your subscriptions, you know, what we call DSTV or your cable. You find out sometimes you have one that you're paying 560. Now 560, that's a lot of money. If you don't have an emergency fund, this is one of the areas that you can actually drop out, so that you can use this money to raise your emergency fund. Because really there's no point of you paying this huge amount and fail to send money home when there's an emergency. So it's just a matter of priority. Like here under variable expenses, the restaurant, if you don't go out, you know, no one will die. So these are some of the things that we can think to temporarily suspend, not entirely, but temporarily suspend, so that this amount can be raised as soon as possible. Because we have really seen what COVID did to many of us. We have people that lost their jobs because, I mean, companies could not pay. So as much as you can, raise the money. And once again, this is just my figure. You need to sit down and calculate your figure to see how much you need to raise. As I mentioned earlier on, the recommended one is 1,000 US dollars, which is around about 10,000 here, but you can customize it really, yeah. And the other thing with this money, once you have raised it, you want to put it where you can easily access it. And that is I'll leave to your discernment. But you want a situation where when something happens, you can just tap into it. You don't have to go through a very long route for you to get the money. Yeah. And yes, I think that's essentially what an emergency fund is. I really, if you've been following my financial series, this is one of the emergency fund. I think I'll just put it at number one. It's one of the things that you need to have for just that peace of mind. Otherwise, looking forward to your interactions, and if you have questions, please leave them in the comment section, and please do subscribe. We are en route to 1,000 subscribers. We had anticipated that we're going to hit 1,000 subscribers sooner, but hey, things happen. But we haven't yet given up. We're still hoping, and if you're new, please do consider to subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you in my next video. We are on financial series.